£16 for a set of Bluetooth smart scales. What could possibly go wrong? Hey, Nish from To The Point Tech here, and I was in the market for a set of Bluetooth smart scales. I'm really lazy, so I didn't want to manually write down my weights, I just wanted it to sync to my phone. So I hopped onto Amazon and I was greeted by the inordinate amount of options, so I did what any frugal person would do and picked the cheapest option. That was this Renpho ES26M, which came in at just £16 or about $30. The scales are reasonably compact, they're about 26 centimeters squared, and as you can see they're made of glass, so you get all these lovely reflections. Now this model is the clouded glass, but it does also come in black. As you can see, there's these kind of metal contacts on the scales. Now these are used for these kind of fancy measurements where it kind of sends electricity through your body, I think, to track various things. The scales are powered by 3 AAA batteries, and they do come provided in the box, which is great. Using the scales is pretty straightforward. You've first got to calibrate them, and you do this by just hopping on them and hopping off and letting it kind of calibrate itself. You then need to set up the scales on the Renpho app, which is available on iOS and Android. I found it pretty straightforward to set up, no hitches there. Making readings on the scales is really easy. You just have to hop onto the scales and it will automatically turn on and make the recording. You don't have to get out your phone every time because the scales do have the ability to store up to 10 readings, which is a little bit of a snag. I'm going to talk about that later on in the review. As I mentioned, those metal plates allow these scales to make lots of interesting types of readings, not just weight. So you've got things like body fat percentage, muscle mass, body metabolic rate. Now, arguably these numbers are pretty useless and inaccurate at best. There could be some use to them. You could kind of look at the way they're changing rather than their absolute values. I probably wouldn't trust them that much. They do have an athlete mode on there, which is meant to be more accurate for people who train and work out. But again, like it was giving me 11% body fat and I'm probably more like 13 or 14 as far as like how things look. So yeah, make of that what you will. Now for me, the most important thing about these scales was just the primary weighing function. I was initially impressed by the 50-gram precision because I thought, you know, the scales in the past I've used aren't that precise. But then I did start to see reviews that were complaining about the variability of the readings on the scales.
Now in my experience, they do seem to be reliable. I tested them a couple times, kind of going away and coming back. On one occasion, they did seem to be off by a few hundred grams, but otherwise it seems okay.
Moving back to the app, I think it is pretty decently made. Sometimes it isn't super intuitive, but it is relatively easy to find what you want to find on there. It's quite easy to look at the trends of week, month, and year, for example, and there are some extra features on there. You can sync to Google Fit, Samsung Health, and Fitbit, which I think is quite a comprehensive set of syncing features. So let's go back to that issue I was talking about of the storing of data. As I said, it's limited to just 10 measurements. I don't see why they had to limit it to 10. It could have easily been 50 or 100, and it's going to mean that you can't just step on the scales every day and check it every week or two. You're going to have to get out your phone quite often to sync that up. However, it becomes an even bigger issue if you're using these scales with multiple users. Now you can use multiple users within the same app, or I believe you can use different phones as well to sync to the scales, and if your users are different weights, it can kind of tell who's who and sync up the data respectively like that. But if you're similar weight, then you're going to have to kind of pick the measurements that are yours and try and basically guess, and it becomes pretty useless. In that scenario, you'd probably just have to get out your app every time you want to take your reading, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of the experience a little bit. Now, what about the other vast amount of scales available? There's brands like eTechCity and InSmart. How are those going to fare? I'm not so sure how the other scales handle multiple users. I was trying to find out about how they can store data as well, and it's kind of hard to find that kind of information, but I imagine they're going to be similar because, for example, the apps used on all these different scales are actually the exact same app, but just skinned with the different name. Honestly, I'd say there's no reason to think these scales are using different hardware and technology underneath the hood. I think they've just got different cosmetic features on the front. There are, of course, more reputable brands out there. For example, Withings have the Body Plus, which comes in at about £60 or about $100, but that has kind of Wi-Fi features, so I think there's no limit to storage because it kind of sends the measurements it makes immediately to the internet, so you don't have to worry about syncing with your phone every time. There's also a couple products by Fitbit, and I would like to think these are more reliable, but the reviews don't necessarily show that, so who knows. I might try one of these more expensive sets of scales in the future and see what it's like. So what can I summarize about these scales? I think the limited storage of readings is also kind of pointlessly limited. It could have easily been higher, and it just makes it slightly more annoying to use the scales because you have to log into the phone that much more often. And this becomes a really big issue if you're planning to have multiple users use the scales, because then you'll literally have to use the app every time.
So I would recommend these scales, especially at the price point, if you don't need kind of ultra precise reliability. I'll have to keep an eye on that reliability issue I was talking about.
And that's everything I wanted to say about these scales. So I hope this review was useful for you and helped you make a decision. Let me know what you think of kind of these cheaper Bluetooth smart scales, and if you've had experience with any others, then I'd be interested to hear about that. Subscribe to stay tuned for more To The Point tech content, and I'll catch you in the next one.